It's Alan here again. I'm just going to do a little bit more on the music synchronization. This time I'm going to show a little bit more in Character Animator, but which some things I missed in the previous video. But then I'm going to show how you can use Premiere Pro as well to patch things together. But just a few things I missed last time. First one of the things you need to decide is what frame rate you're going to use. Now, Character Animator used to use a frame rate of 12 by default. So if you click on the scene, over here in the property parameters, you notice there's a number 12, and this is the frames per second. You've got to keep all the clips, put simply, in the same frame rate, or else some are going to go twice as fast as others. So you really need to choose, and I think the new default now is 24. 24 is quite a good number because you can divide it by 2 and 3 and 4 and a whole lot of numbers. So 24 frames per second is a new recommendation, but you can't sort of mix half and half. So you really need to decide before you start the project what frame rate you're going to use, and then make sure all the different tools are consistent. Now, why is that particularly of note for music? Well, if I zoom right in, the smallest frame of offsets you can pick is based on the frame rate. So I'm going to pick a music file, just drag a music file down here, and you can see the waveform coming through here. It's a little bit hard to see, but if I zoom back out, you can see some little peaks and valleys and so forth, and they line up with the music. So that's usually what you want to synchronize with. I was just synchronizing based on this timeline, but the reality is you want to synchronize it to the music. So if you can work out what that is in the music, whoops, keep clicking the wrong button. So there's a piano note there, and you can hear as I move along. And so if I want to sort of line something to there, and I zoom right in, oops, I shouldn't have scrolled. Okay, I'm going to move forward a frame, back a frame. So one of the things, I don't know whether this is happening for other people, but sometimes I find Character Animator doesn't display the waveform, which is rather annoying, because the waveform really helps. You can do it. There we go. It comes back again. I don't really have a good answer why that happens. It doesn't like me. But when it's zoomed in like this, you can still see the waveform shape. And so there it is. And so if I've got 12 frames per second, if I come up here and change this to 24, I've actually, I can actually zoom in further now, and I've got more precision because I can only line things up with a particular frame. And so it just gives me that higher precision of where I can actually cause movements to start and end. So that's one of the advantages of going to 24 frames per second, which I just find is useful. Even it might be hard to see it, but it's amazing what your eyes can pick up sometimes. So I generally recommend these days 24 frames per second if you're trying to synchronize music to the track. So another thing, now that I've actually dropped the music track, I'm just zooming back out. You might notice my track is very long, and I may decide to have a series of scenes. You don't have to, but if you decide to have multiple scenes, you might have the puppet in different positions or different characters, or if that's the way you decide to go, you can just come in here and if I just zoom out, oops, frustrating. If you grab the edge, you can just trim the song back, and so you just won't have all the audio. Now, I never use this audio track in the final cut. I always go over to Premiere Pro because you're going to join different scenes together, but it's very useful here just to line it up. So I leave it in there, but if I were to work out halfway through, I'd trim this edge, slide it across, and so I get the right positions. If you leave a bit of an extra at the start and the end, if you can get it precise and accurate, cool. But it can be tricky. So what I tend to do is I'd leave like another half a second or something at the beginning and half a second at the end. Like I move all this along a little bit just to sort of line it up this way, and then I can use Premiere Pro to trim the audio clip afterwards and tie it all back together again. It just you don't want gaps in the final video, so it's better to have a little bit too much than a little bit too little, because you can trim the beginning and end off your individual scenes. And so then I'd just bring that back just for convenience, work out the right length, set the duration of the scene to, like, over here 5 seconds or whatever it is, so it sort of, and then when I export, I might have a little bit more at the beginning and the end, but as I say, trim that off with Premiere Pro afterwards. And then, so I drop this same audio file into multiple scenes and just trim it to different positions. If I grab the long one, and of course it just goes and gets rid of the waveform at the moment. Doesn't like me. There we go. You can come along here and sort of say, well, right there I want to edit split, and it will also split the audio track, and so I can drag that off to another scene. But you can actually drag it out, and you'll notice it's exactly the same. So what the trim is doing is it's giving you a window into the overall track. It hasn't actually touched the original track, it's just changing what subset of the track you actually go to see. Cool. So putting this track in, it just allows you to line it up. I'd even include it in the export, but you get these little clicks and pops sometimes when you join these audio tracks together, so I never do the final thing using this. I jump over to Premiere Pro as the next step. But main things are, recommend the frame rate, setting it to like 24. It just gives you a little bit more accuracy when you're trying to line things up to it. It's not essential, but I just found sometimes it was a little bit easier. And the other one was dropping in the audio track. Feel free to drop it on all the different scenes you're going to use, and then just trim the edges off. But if you put a little bit more at the beginning and a little bit more at the end, it'll just make it easier, and you can do the last final adjustments in Premiere Pro. And there's nothing like trying it. I'd experiment, don't do the whole thing, do your whole video and then try to do the final cut. I just rough something together quickly, push all the way through all the tools so you understand how they work. Cool, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump over to Premiere Pro. I've got a little video here. It's a building falling down, what all good videos should be. And what I'm going to use is I'm going to grab an audio track I've got. I'm going to drop that there, and I'm going to pretend this was something I generated out of Character Animator, and I just want to use this to show a couple of different ideas that you can do in here. So this one's a little bit different than how you zoom in and out, but I'm going to zoom in a bit. And so there's this, I might sort of say, well, let's what I'm gonna do is I can trim the beginning off this audio, and just so it doesn't line up really nicely, I've got this coming along, and so you can hear around about here the note, and you can just see it down in the waveform there. Can I zoom this down? Yeah, I can make the waveform a bit bigger. Cool. And so the waveform is around about here, but the construction ball is over there. So what you can do in Premiere Pro is it's got this, it's like a razor tool over here. You can come along and sort of say, well, that's where it actually occurred, but back here is where I want to end up. So if I come back to the selection tool, if you right, I'm going to select both. If you right click, of course it doesn't like me. So what's going to happen is I'm not actually going to use this audio track at all. I'm just going to use this, but I may actually delete it later on. But let's come in here. There's a speed duration. And so what you can do is I can say something like 50%, and because they're overlapping, it got hidden. Okay, let's just undo that for a moment. If I play it at half speed, where to go again? Speed duration, set it to 50. Sorry, just didn't undo enough. Speed duration, where is it in the menu here? Speed duration. Okay, so it was 100, because I just did a few undos. So it was 100. If I set it to 50, the clip will play twice as long. If I set it to, where is it again? Speed duration. If I set it to 200, it'll play half as long. And so you can see that the ball's swinging faster. So I can use Premiere Pro to adjust the playback speed. And so if I want to go to here, what I'll do is I'll say, okay, well we started from 0. Let's say that's the position I wanted in the sound. So it's 115, and I want to scale this to exactly that. Well, what you can do, we just undid, so we go back to the scale, speed, duration. This tool can either do a percentage, or you can actually specify the duration here. And so if I specify that, what did I do wrong? Oh, I had the wrong track clicked. Okay, so it's 105. So I come up here, select the track, and I can actually pick this, and I'm just using the up and down keys, and so I'm going to say I want it to be 105. So you can specify the exact duration you want it to be, and it will scale it to that exact duration. And so I can get it so the ball hits at exactly the right time, and then I can bring this one back in. So if I sort of say, well, this time I wanted to land exactly at that point, what would I do? So I look at the timeline, and it's 9:18. There might be a better way, but this is just how I do it. And so if I come back here, it was 103 or whatever up to 9:18, and well, let's use 12:23. Okay, so 12:23 minus the 103, so it's 11. And so I want this to be length 11, so I go speed, duration, and I want to make this 11. So I'm just using the arrow keys just because it gives me fairly good accuracy. You can probably type it in. And so it's 11. So this is the seconds in the frame within the seconds. So then go that, and see it's extended it to the right length. And so now I got the ball to hit at exactly the right tone, and the building should collapse. And so you can see just by inside Premiere Pro using, it's called speed duration. It might be out of the window, sorry, but it's a speed duration. If you right click and bring up the menu, you can actually specify the exact length. And so just by splicing the video up using the razor tool, you can then adjust the video. So if you've done some manual dragging, you can use Premiere Pro to sort of make a scene, a little part of a recording take a little bit longer to line up with the music. And what I'd do is I'd actually get rid of the music track down here. That's a mute button, or you can just delete it, and just drop in the music track, one global end-to-end, no joining together. There'll be no clicks and pops or anything like that by accident, and then you can just match the video up in here. So it is another approach. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but what I sometimes do is if I couldn't be bothered going back to Character Animator, I'll start fiddling in here just by splicing the video up and using things like set duration to get it to line up with particular events in the audio track. So that was the other part that I wanted to get to. Just the whole idea is using Premiere Pro, if you've got your little clips, for example over in Character Animator, personally I tend to use export via media encoder, and I'll use a media encoder to generate a file per scene, and I'll save it away on disk, and then I'll load that file up. I just found it personally on my little laptop, it just works better. So I go through the whole encode phase, and then I'm just using Premiere Pro on those files. I don't use dynamic linking most of the time. I've never tried dynamic linking with the scale. It might not work. But certainly if you export video files and then load them into Premiere Pro, you just drag the files in and drag them into your clip and all that sort of stuff. you can then do all this scaling and so forth. And this also is where the 24 frames per second, if you use that in Character Animator, because when I'm stretching this, it's actually going to repeat the same picture more than once across more frames. And so if I've doubled the length here, 24 frames per second is actually going to reduce to actually 12 frames per second. So if I'd actually started at 12 frames per second and I'd stretched it out, it may only be doing like 6 frames per second, and you can start to get a bit more jerky. So it's another reason to crank up the frames per second inside Character Animator. Hope this was useful. I think that was all I wanted to say, just showing this splice, and you can adjust the lengths, and you can get things to line up here, and then mute out the audio track because it doesn't seem to scale with the actual video, but you can adjust the video lengths to get things to line up here, and you keep layering them all in. And if I wanted to trim a bit off, it's just fairly easy in here just to grab an end and trim out the bits you want and don't want. Cool, hopefully that was useful. The whole goal is to get things in the video to line up exactly with the audio track. So I do tend to use Character Animator first, but you can do it in Premiere Pro, and you can splice it little bits and join them together as you want, and to do your last cut. But as I said, I always use one continuous audio file in Premiere Pro for something like music laid over the top to avoid any clicks and pops. If I'd splice this and join them together, it's a real risk you face. Hope this was useful. Take care.